Over the past 75 years, more than 10,000 chemicals have entered our food supply, but the EU allows just 300 additives. At Thrive Market, we prioritize quality, banning over 1,000 ingredients found in conventional grocery stores. Our Healthy Swap scanner helps you find better versions of your pantry essentials without the junk, dyes, or fillers, and everything is delivered right to your doorstep. So shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health at thrivemarket.com/get-started for 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift.
Hey folks, good evening where I'm from. My name is Kalu Aja and welcome to another episode of our X Money Space. We're on here every weekend, 7:30 p.m. West African time, and of course we're talking money, the economy and finance, and we always want to make it personal. So personal finance is a big deal here. The whole idea is to talk around those economic topics, explain them, so that way we can become better investors and, of course, better stewards of our money, right? So welcome to 2025, guys. You made it, all of you. Glad to see you all here. When you invest, we always say you invest according to your objectives and your risk profile, right? So we thought it would be fantastic to start off 2025 with a discussion around risks, right? Systematic risk, which means the risk you cannot diversify away. So let's say you were trying to buy a Nigerian bank or to buy Dangote cement, or you want to invest in land or shares. As long as that investment, right, is Nigeria, then you have to incur the systematic risk. There are two types of risk. There's systematic and unsystematic. So the systematic risk means basically that you are in Nigeria. Because you are in Nigeria and you're a Nigerian and you're investing in Nigeria, right? You are exposed to that risk. And there are certain risks that are there. So it'll be important for us to understand what those risks are with a guy that basically does this for a living, right? Or an organization that does this for a living. What should we watch out for? What are the big ticket items out there? If we could, we're economic Twitter space. What are the economic things that are going to drive growth, investment, our personal incomes, budgets, insecurity, infrastructure? Just to talk around that topic. So none of that is. We've got a great guest here today. His name is Chester. I'm going to ask him to unmute, introduce himself and his organization, what they do. And then we'll have a discussion. I'm going to have a one-on-one with Cheta for a very, very long time, right? But if you do have a question, you can just do a DM. I'll let you speak once I'm able to get through a lot of those questions with Cheta. But if you have something really important and you want me to ask him, just DM me. And after that, I'm going to open up the floor in case you guys have one or two questions for him as well. So Cheta, welcome. You want to unmute and sort of introduce yourself, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you for having me, Kado. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to everyone. Introduce myself. That's So, yeah, my name is Cheta Wanze. I write. I do research. I started out my career as an engineer. Somehow I stumbled my way into journalism and then stumbled my way into research. Mainly political and economic research. And at some point, and it was about the start of the last decade, in my role as managing editor at Daily Times, I noticed that there was a dearth at least public research on the nexus between politics and the economy. Something that does the kind of work that organizations such as Stratfor used to do in the United States. Stratfor has been acquired by the Rain Corporation, or the IISS in the UK. So because of that, I eventually, when I left Daily Times, I started SPM Intelligence. So Intelligence has been around for 12 years now. And the work that we do basically highlights, we do research, publish a lot of reports that highlights how political decisions affect the economy and vice versa, because it's a closed loop between politics and the economy that a lot of Nigerians don't seem to have don't seem to understand, even though I must say that in the last decade or so, many people in Nigeria have begun to at least claim that they notice that that linkage between political decisions and economic outcomes. And unfortunately, the linkage between economic outcomes and political decisions, or the kind of politics that you end up playing because of the economy. So that's it's sort of like broad summary of what SBM does. So, for example, back in 2015, when not many people were talking about it, not many people knew about it, we were probably, at least publicly, first to start to bring to national attention the pastoral conflict between largely Fulani herders and largely indigenous farmers in various communities in the North Central. When we brought that to their attention, a lot of people were attacked by a lot of people, called them fancy names such as alarmists, prophets of doom. But because we did a series of 2 reports about that, the first being terror in food baskets. And in one of those reports, the deepening pastoral conflict, we ended that report with a prediction. I think prediction is the right word, which unfortunately appears to have come to pass. That if this thing isn't tackled, that we will get to a point where these various groups that are roaming around freely will be able to take on military formations without fear. And I think it's unarguable to say that has happened. In the course of the last decade, everyone had a situation where very embarrassingly, a group attacked and kidnapped a soldier from the Nigerian Defense Academy, and soldiers gathered to pay a ransom to have that soldier released. So all of these things have their roots in economic developments, the lack of an economy, so to say, in the country. And these are the kind of things that, as an organization, we try to scream about, we try to shout about, we try to let people know. Hopefully, at some point in Nigeria's in Nigeria's political process, we will be able to muster the willpower to do what needs to be done without fear or favor. I think the key word there being favor, and get our country on the right track. But as long as we don't get that done, we would remain in the vicious cycle that we already are in.
Yeah, I remember the incident you speak about, and again, it speaks to the, when that can happen, I mean the soldiers being kidnapped and ransom being paid, it speaks to something else. But let's just see if we can do a top-down, right? If I was an investor, I didn't know Nigeria. I'm a European guy. I'm a Bloomberg guy, and I want to do top-down. I want to invest in emerging markets. My system says you want to invest in African continent, right? What risks will Bloomberg tell me about Nigeria? What are going to be those big flashing lights that will talk to me about Nigeria? What would it say? What are the top 2 or top 3 red flags that an investor will see if he wants to inflow funds to invest in Nigeria?
So there are 2 risks that I would point out, and then there's one soft one. Let me start with the soft one because it underpins so many things that people don't seem to notice. People seem to think a lot of lip service, and that's the rule of law. As long as an investor is not certain that he will get proper due process from the judiciary, we will always be exposed, or will always be put at the back of queue. Something that I'm very sure that people have started to notice, even if not in very solid terms yet, but it's there, is the fact that many people who are trying to bring money into Nigeria, who are trying to do deals in Nigeria, foreigners, and in many cases, even Nigerians, have over the last few years increasingly preferred to have the agreements signs and enforceability put in foreign jurisdictions. Essentially, that tells you that there's no trust in Nigerian judiciary. And this thing goes far back. So, for example, the Chinese firm that has been chasing the Ogun State government for recompense over the free trade zone. I'm sure you remember that story from last year.
Yeah, about the private jets being seized and all that.
About the private jets being seized. Think about it. A Chinese firm was trying to do business with the state government in Nigeria, got a sovereign guarantee from the federal government of Nigeria, but all of the jurisprudence, the jurisdiction for the legal process was in foreign countries. It was in the UK, it was in France, it was in the US, it was in Canada. They did not trust that the Nigerian legal system will be there to support them if they needed dispute resolution. And I think it's very important for us to understand one very fundamental fact of life, whether it is economy, whether it is life itself. If me and you, Carlo, we've known each other for 10 years now. If me and you, as much as we know each other and we think we're friends, if we decide to go into business together, the possibility that there will be a dispute at one point or the other is very high. It's just human nature. So we would need a trusted third party to be able to resolve such disputes if they do arise, if and when they do arise. So what does it say about a country, about an economy, that no one seems to trust what should be the statutory third party? What should be the statutory trusted third party? Instead, everybody who wants to operate in that economy apparently ought to go and settle their issues with a third party, a trusted third party outside of the jurisdiction of that economy. It adds a layer of cost. Because, for example, if Cheta from Anioma wants to do business with Kanu from Abia, and we decide that, okay, the area that we will do our jurisprudence is London, arbitration is London, then we have a problem. We have that extra problem of cost. And that cost problem is no longer in Naira, it is in UK pounds. So it raises the cost of doing business in Nigeria, and as a result, raises our risk ratings. That's one. That's the soft one. Now, the two that I would like to focus on very, very urgently, because for me, they are actually very, very critical, and we seem in many respects playing lip service to them, are inflation and unemployment. So, inflation for me is probably the most pressing concern, the most pressing hard concern. I think in my head, without any doubt, rule of law is the most pressing concern, because everything is the framework, is the glue that binds everything together. But inflation of the hard concerns is probably the most pressing, because inflation speaks to a destruction of value. And when you can't even calculate what your inflation rate is properly, then you are not making informed decisions. So let's look at it this way. One unfortunate thing that we like to do in Nigeria, we like to compare ourselves a lot with the US and the UK. So I would put those countries' inflation rates in just for good measure. Our inflation rate, the last time it was published, was 34.6%, mainly driven by food costs, currency devaluation, rising energy, and supply chain disruptions. Abi? What was the UK's most recent inflation rate? 3.5%.
Yeah, below 4.
What was the US most recent inflation rate? 2.75%.
Yeah.
But those two economies are not comparable with Nigeria. So let's look at some comparable economies. And I would say South Africa, Mexico, Indonesia. South Africa, 2.83%. Mexico, 4.77%. Indonesia, 2.1%. I'm picking these economies because they have similar profiles to Nigeria, large populations, relatively diverse economies. I'm using the word relative as the operating word here, and all three of them are emerging markets. If the people that you should be comparing yourself with have single-digit inflation and have managed to keep it, then it means that somebody who is investing in those economies can plan. One, somebody who is investing in those economies will not see destruction of value. And most importantly, circling back to planning, is the fact that if he puts in $100,000 into the economy, he knows that the amount of work that will be needed to be done is a fixed certain amount. Somebody who puts in $100,000 in Nigeria at officially 34.6%, and for those of us who buy food in Nigeria, we don't believe that is 34.6%, but hey, it's what we've been told officially. So somebody who puts that $100,000 in Nigeria knows that the people in Nigeria have to do at least 15 times as much work as the people in South Africa in order to bring back the same value. So you have to ask yourself, is that humanly possible for them to do 15 times as much work when you consider the other variables that are issues in Nigeria, number one being energy? So that's one, inflation. Number two, unemployment. The unemployment crisis is a huge problem. And unfortunately, I think that it's something we have buried our heads in sand about. So going back to, again, just to assuage that Nigerian thing of always looking at the UK and US. Youth unemployment in the UK is about 11.5%. Youth unemployment in the US is just over 8%. In South Africa, which is the worst and is closest to us, is 27.9%. In Indonesia, it's 3.42%, and in Mexico, it's 2.81%. What it means is that both Indonesia and Mexico do not have the reservoir of disaffected youth who will cause trouble. Because one of the things that you need to look at as a potential investor, especially if you want to invest in something that requires a lot of infrastructure, is security issues. As an organization, we've done security surveys for potential investors. Why? Because they are concerned that, is there a well of unemployed, and possibly this is something we don't talk about a lot, unemployable youths who could wreak havoc on their investment. So in all these countries, US, UK, South Africa, Indonesia, Mexico, they all define standard working hours as 8 hours per day, 40 hours per week. Nigeria will currently define unemployment based on the latest MBS methodology. We define unemployment as 1 hour per week. They will define employment as 1 hour per week, which means that according to the official figures, our unemployment is like 3% or something.
About 4%. It doesn't make any sense.
Again, that's burying our heads in the sand. We have a problem, and if we don't tell ourselves the truth of where we are with respect to that, it can easily blow up in our faces. So it is important for us. So I think I've answered your questions of the top 2 or 3 things. You said 2 or 3, so I'm giving 3. The top 2 or 3 things that an investor should be looking at. Rule of law. We need to fix that as a matter of urgency. There needs to be consistency across. Somebody who runs afoul of an agreement in Nigeria needs to know that he will get consistent judgment. So, for example, if you say you are going to invest in Dubai, you know from the get-go that, number one, you must get an Emirati partner. Number two, if a dispute arises, you have to speak Arabic. You need to be able to read Arabic because the legal proceedings are going to be done in Arabic. Number three, you know that you need to understand Islamic law because it will be done under Islamic law. Things like riba will become the guiding principles of that jurisprudence. So at least, even if you may not agree with Islamic law or all of that, you know from the get-go that this is what you are going to get. So you can prepare for it. There's certainty. In Nigeria, there's a lot of uncertainty around things like court judgments and jurisprudence and arbitration, which is why people prefer to go outside for dispute resolution. And like I said, that adds an extra layer of complexity, it adds an extra layer of cost. So that's one. Number two, inflation. Inflation is the thief of value. It destroys value. And you can't build value in an environment of extremely high inflation. And then, of course, unemployment, because the unemployment rate means that there's always that underlying specter of insecurity and social unrest. So those are for me the top three.
Yeah, and I think you've sort of like given us very, very good responses to that. Rule of law, I remember when President Yaradua was asked his number one guiding principle, and he said rule of law. And back then, Nigeria had, with infrastructure was important. We even had the insecurity. We had the Niger Delta that taking oil exports really did down. The guy was talking about rule of law, and back then it sounded like he didn't know what he was talking about. But now, when you look at it today, like you've said, rule of law today, how you've made it economic, right? You've said it adds costs to your business. Like if I have to go and do Delaware registrations and I have to go to an American court and I'm in Yaba, so if I have a dispute, I have to go hire an American lawyer or someone that knows about American law, pay them in dollars. That's a cost to me, which I of course pass down to Nigerians who then pay. So that also adds inflation. That's the key point. But I want to zero in on the other two you've spoken about, the inflation and the unemployment, because rule of law might take time, right? But inflation, unemployment, SPM does this jollof rice index, where what you guys do is you take the cost of cooking a pot of jollof rice, and you are tracking that pot of jollof rice, across the board. Are there any insights we can jollof rice index? We know the costs have gone up, but can you link that to us to the farming crisis? Is there a connection? Is there a spider web? Can we just sweep that spider web aside and with food prices come down? Is it as easy as saying if there is peace in the food growing areas, then inflation comes down? Can you just give us that connective tissue, if you may, to connect the inflation, the agriculture, and what we can do in terms of bringing down inflation on its own? Then we'll go to unemployment, if you may.
Okay. And are you hearing me well?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think I could hear you speaking through an earpiece or so. I'm not sure if others.
I'm speaking through a wired headset.
Okay, I think now it's kind of better.
Okay.
Yeah, but if anyone has a complaint, send me a DM or whatever, and I'll just try to get to each other. Go ahead.
Okay, so the Jollof Index is a metric that we developed back in 2016. We started out first in Lagos and Abuja, and over the years we slowly expanded to 8 cities in Nigeria and 2 in Ghana. So that's where we collect monthly food prices from these places. And it's not just food prices. There's a slew of, so we actually have prices going back to 2016 for both Lagos and Abuja, 2017 for some other places, and in the case of Accra and Kumasi, going back to 2021. And we won except for December. And the reason we do not do December is that food prices traditionally, and it's not just food prices, transportation prices, have traditionally tended to spike in December. And this food price spike in December actually comes to a bit of part of the problem. There's a huge infrastructure problem which creates a scarcity in our region because of our supply chains are not well built. So you are trying to do the bulk of consumption, for example, taking Nigeria alone. Let's shift Ghana aside now. Taking Nigeria alone, a good percentage of our consumption will be in Lagos and Abuja. But because we don't have A, storage facilities, B, good roads, you find that a lot of the things that should arrive are not properly stored, and that creates an artificial scarcity at the time when demand goes up. And when that demand goes up, naturally, demand goes up, materials are scarcer, prices will go up. So because of that, we removed the December data collection. And as a matter of fact, Bloomberg actually, so in December of 2024, at the request of Bloomberg, we actually collected some of this data. Normally, guys who go into the field to collect data do not. in December. They have December off. But this last year, we're in 2025 now. Last year, they went to ask for some of the prices because Bloomberg informed us that they were doing this huge feature on the food price rise in Nigeria. And of course, we were able to show them that these things had shot up as a result. But nevertheless, they had been shooting up for a while. Now, why did we settle on jollof rice? Jollof rice is the one thing that in any part of Nigeria that you go to eat. It is not forbidden anywhere in Nigeria. All Nigerians eat jollof. These methods of preparation might vary slightly from the regional variations from region to region, but nevertheless, it is still the same basic ingredients that are put into that meal all over the country. One of the things that we saw starting in 2021 was the substitution of chicken for eggs. Increasingly began to happen. Another thing that we saw, this was in 2022, and we began to talk about it, was that the protein portions began to get smaller. So where people used to use chicken before, they began to substitute with egg first, and then even the eggs, they began to reduce the size, they began to shed the egg. All of that tells you that people are getting poorer, and they are trying, and in many cases, failing to keep up. Again, bringing us to inflation and the destruction of value. So we've been tracking these prices for 9 years now. Wow, 9 years. Okay, 9 years now, and it has been a consistent upward trend. The very first time that we collected the Jollof Index, the prices for materials to make jollof, a plate of jollof rice, the cost of a bowl of jollof rice, for a pot of jollof rice for a family of 5, because at the time the NBS had a family of 5 as the average, the cost of the size of the average family in Nigeria. So when we first collected that, it was about 4,900 naira for a pot of jollof for a family of 5 for a single meal. Now, the last time we did it, it was about 32,000 naira or thereabouts, which means that in 9 years it has gone up by a factor of I'm trying to do the math in my head, about 653% or thereabouts, 650% rough. So you have to ask yourself the question: is there anybody on planet Earth whose income has gone up by 650% in 9 years? I would before we should remove people like Elon Musk and that's people in his WhatsApp group from that calculation. We're talking of human beings now, not billionaires, as far as I'm concerned. They're a separate class. I would like to enter that class someday, but I'm not there. I'm not there, nearly there yet. So you have to ask the normal average human being, anybody whose income has gone up by 653% in 9 years. It's hard to find. So it tells you what the average Nigerian is really struggling with. And we have data, we have research that actually corroborates that. Back in 2018, with a study on the percentage of, on the fraction of what Nigerians spend on their income on, most people in 2018 spent their income, the majority of their income, 58% of their income on food. That was in 2018. We repeated that study in 2023, and that percentage had gone up 97%. If people are spending 97% of what they earn just to eat, what will 3% do?
So you're saying 97% of the income. It's
63% of Nigerians, according to our 2023 study, spends 97% of their income on food. We published that study.
wow. MBS has at about 57.
The MBS numbers align with what we published in 2018. So I'm not sure when the MBS did their updates.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. So we did that study in 2018, and we repeated it in 2023.
That's
So 63% of. So I think it's important to point out that 37% of Nigerians who don't spend that high proportion of their income on food, but 63% of Nigerians spend an extremely high proportion of their income on food, 97%. And that is very important because it shows us one thing. We are a fundamentally poor country. We are a very poor country, and we don't seem to realize that. Any government in Nigeria, its number one priority now should be getting food to the tables of Nigerians as cheaply as possible. And it brings us back to the question you asked, what are the things that, so you tie it to things like conflict that is happening in various parts of the country. When we started tracking Nigerian army deployments in 2016, the Nigerian army was deployed in 30 states of the Federation. Now the Nigerian army is deployed in all 36 states in one capacity or the other. It tells you that the conflicts are simply spread all over the country. There's one conflict or the other, whether it is Operation Mesa in Lagos or Operation Swakin Daji in Kaduna, or there is the Nigerian army is doing something everywhere. These are jobs that the police should be doing. It tells you that a lot of these conflicts are getting out of hand. I personally, when we were doing the field work for terror in the basket back in 2014, I personally spoke with farmers who at the time had not been to their farms in 4 years. Wow. 2014 was 11 years ago now. So if these farmers had not been to their farms in 4 years then, there was an outlier, we wrote his story in Terror in the Food Basket. There was an outlier who had not been to the farm in 8 years. But let us use him as our worst case scenario. If that man, Erso, if I remember his name correctly, had not been to the farm in 8 years as of 2014, add 11 years to that, that's 17 years. His children, based on the smallholder farmer model that we've traditionally pursued, his children would have been going to the farm with him to learn the farming techniques, have not been to the farms as well. They are all adults now. They haven't learned how to farm. That means knowledge lost. So we are going to have to do retraining all over again for our agricultural sector across the board. We are going to have to rebuild. There was a study that we did for a client. I'm not at liberty till today to say who the client was, but this study was back in 2019. Yeah. But I can't, because we put some of this data with the client's permission in one of our public reports. We calculated that Nigeria's food storage capacity would last the country for just 4 days maximum. So that is another thing that we will need to work on as a matter of urgency. We need to be able to store food in case there is a shock. Because it is this inability to store food that whenever there is a shock, and there's a shock every December, however we want to describe it, that shock of a large number of people suddenly wanting to make merry is a shock to the system. And funny enough, that shock also happens every time there is one of the big Muslim prices suddenly shoot up. Why? Infrastructure. We don't have storage capacity. We don't have the right kind of road networks to get the right quantities of food to where they are needed at the right time. These are all things that we should be putting every urgency in trying to sort out. It is critical to sort it out because, again, I'll repeat, our country is full of desperately poor people, and we have been dancing at the tipping edge for a long time. We've been seesawing, and it's people tend to underestimate, and I think there's a sort of complacency that has entered because for a long time we've not actually tipped over. The closer we came to tipping over completely was the EndSARS protest of 5 years ago now. But we've been dancing on that, and I fear that we may have reached the tipping point, that we might finally just tip over. But there's a sense of complacency that I see, not just in our government, but even among Nigerians themselves.
Okay, so Cheta, that's again that's another good introspection to connect the inflation with the lack of infrastructure and tying it to food and insecurity, which is again what we've always argued, that inflation in Lagos, the cost of your car loan in Lagos, is driven by if a farmer.
Sorry to interrupt. Do people still get car loans in Lagos?
Let's use something that people get. People get lots of personal loans, right?
The last I checked, the banks have pulled car loans from the repertoire.
No, let's use personal loans, Cheta. Let's just use personal loans. Yeah. Let's say you go to any of those banks on your app and you get a personal loan. You are paying 30%, 33%, 40%, very, very high interest rate. So the point is that interest rate is high, partially driven by the cost of food in Kirby, Sokoto, Benue. There's a linkage, which the quote-unquote most folks in Lagos don't understand, that the MPR is being driven, that's the monetary policy rates by the Central Bank of Nigeria, is driven by increases in inflation. And inflation is driven by food inflation. So when the cost of onions in Kirby go up, it causes the CPI, the Consumer Price Index that tracks inflation, to go up. When CPI goes up, it causes the monetary policy rate to go up, which then causes the CBN to raise interest rates, which then causes your app to raise interest rates. So that connection is there, that food availability reduces inflation and the cost of your personal loan. So when the president had said that we're going to have duty-free food imports, I tweeted that was a very, very masterful stroke of policy, because I had argued for a long time we should allow food to come to the country at no cost for between 0 to 90 days. So the president passed that policy, and till date it's not been done. That was passed way back in June 2024. It's not been done till today. The customs brought out a lot of guidelines that made it almost impossible for it to happen. So can you speak around this zero duty food import that was supposed to happen? Because like we said, if I'm an investor, I want to come to Nigeria, inflation is going to be my key headache, and this is a policy to reduce inflation. Why hasn't it happened? This is now the politics and the economy coming together now. So what's your take? What is the backstory? Why cheap food has not been to come to Nigeria?
I think I'll use one word, and it's a spiritual word, for principalities. The Nigerian system, so the correct term, if I'm doing a report for a client, I would not say principalities, of course. But principalities is an expression that pretty much every Nigerian can understand. The correct term would be vested interests. I think that the key challenge that this particular president faces in terms of vested interest is, more than any other president in our history, President Tinubu is the ultimate political animal. Politics is the thing that he has lived and breathed since the 1990s, since the early 1990s, and possibly even since the 80s. The unfortunate outcome of that is that he has had to make a lot of deals / compromises to get to where he is now, which means that for many people, for many things that he may want to do, and this is me giving him the benefit of the doubt that he wants to do positive stuff, but he simply can't, because of a lot of the deals, a lot of the people that he has gotten into bed with over the last 30 to 40 years. 30 to 40 years is a long time. That's a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of bodies to gather. So that is the most fundamental problem. He's really, as much as he may want to, again, giving him benefit of the doubt, as much as he may want to, he can make all the right noises about zero interest duty on food, and that is the right thing to do, given the crisis that we are facing. But implementation and punishing those, because again, that's another thing that is very important, that we tend to overlook the importance of punishment as an incentive to other people to do the right thing. So if somebody is caught doing the wrong thing, bring down the full weight of the law on that person, so that other people will see and realize that, okay, we cannot cross this line, because if we cross this line, as they will say in Pidgin English, anything we see, may you take up. But unfortunately, we don't have that. And I'll give an example. The journalist Fisayo Soyombo last year, for a grand total of 43 days, was providing evidence every day of massive malfeasance in customs. Now, who are the people who will be responsible for ensuring 0% import duty on food? It's customs.
And customs reports directly to the coordinating minister of the economy, Mr. Wale Edu, directly.
And Fishayo was shouting about massive off-the-scale corruption in customs for 43 days. And nothing happened. Not a thing happened. I stand to be corrected, but nobody has been fired. Nobody has been brought to book. Even with all the evidences, we've not had a trial for anybody on all of this. So nobody has gone to prison to show other people within customs that this is wrong. So when you have something like that, please explain to me how the president can now say, okay, implement zero import duties on food, when people in customs make money precisely by putting a markup on food that is intercepted at the ports.
Yeah, but Cheta, let's say this. Let's pull back and say this. You've rightly said the president, as a politician, got into power because he struck deals across the federation. There is no state, tribe, party, local government in Nigeria today that does not want cheap food.
Sorry, Carlo. I want to divert you a bit for a pet peeve of mine. I really hate the word tribe. When talking about Nigeria.
Okay.
Because, for example, Denmark has 5.8 million people. And I think that ethnically 5.4 million of them are Danish. And everybody will call Denmark a nation. There are, as of the last census, there are at least 30 million Igbo people. So why would you call Igbos a tribe? When you call Danes a nation.
So
please,
I get you.
I think this is the reason why I consider this an important enough for us to have a diversion is because it is very critical for us to understand what Nigeria is, so that we can actually start having the right path to solve our issues. Nigeria is a collection of nations who were put together by force, by fiat, by Frederick Lugard in 1914. That's another discussion entirely. Yes, I agree. But even from our economic perspective, it is important for us to know that Nigeria is a country that is a collection of nations. And each of these nations has its own interest. In many cases, poorly defined. So from the Igbo nation, the Igbo nation does not have a properly defined interest. But that is what Nigeria is. And once we understand that this is what Nigeria is, then we will probably be able to start saying, okay, what are the interests of the Yoruba nation? What are the interests of the Urhobo nation? What are the interests of the Tarok nation? What are the interests of the Bekwara nation? And then we can now say, okay, since we've identified this interest, how can we put all these interests together to talk about the interest of Nigeria? Because I want to preempt something you were saying. You were saying that, that it is in the interest of everybody within Nigeria to have cheap food. I would argue that it is not. We have vested interest within the body policy of Nigeria who have, because of the nature of the Byzantine nature of the Nigerian economic system, have risen above, they transcend all of these basic problems of food.
Yes, but Cheta, this is the point, Cheta. I want to land on.
These people, you will land, but these people are able to, because they don't have to worry about food. They always get first dibs on everything. So their own interest, their singular interest in maintaining power. And because they have power, whether it is political power or economic power, they have power. And their singular interest is maintaining that power. And they have an outside influence over, whether you want to call it governance or policy, whatever you want to call it, they have an outside influence. Their own interest is maintaining things as they are. And until we address that, we don't. So in reality, it looks, the normal thing to say is that we have an interest in bringing down food prices. But Nigeria, as it's currently constructed, has never served the majority of the population of Nigeria. Not since the time of George Goldie. George Goldie was Lugard's predecessor. Not since the time of George Goldie has Nigeria ever served the interest of majority of the people within its borders. That is the one constant in Nigeria that has never changed. So we need to understand that and then start having an honest discussion on how to move that paradigm from serving the interest of a capricious elite to serving the interest of the majority of people within the borders of Nigeria.
Okay, but I completely agree on that part, Jetta. But to the point I'm trying to make here, right? The president is on a mandate that has been, it's a coalition that has been cobbled together to win an election. If the president today can achieve a 50% reduction in food prices and it can stay the same from now to the next election, the president would win in a landslide. This is where I'm going to. The point
if the president can achieve that, there will be no need for an election.
Yeah, Cheta, let me just say this point across. So what I'm saying is this. A political quote-unquote animal understands that if I get the price of a bag of rice today in Nigeria to become 50,000, 40,000 naira, I'm going to win election. I don't have to pay anybody. That people in those areas today that are quote-unquote hostile to him would vote for him overwhelmingly. If he knows that, and you say there are cabals, there are principalities that are stopping him from doing this, isn't this the whole entire game to say, I'm going to put my entire presidency, the security, the goodwill, the communications, everything, to ensure that a policy I have passed, this is not a suggestion, he has passed the policy, zero duty on food imports. Who has stopped the policy? The Nigerian customs. Who do they report to? Mr. Wale Edu, a quote-unquote kitchen cabinet member of his. Why can't they get this across the finish line? That's because the point is clear. If you do it, you not only win an election, you are going to be hailed. But customs are in your way. And if you do this, not just food, if you bring down the cost of rice by 50%, the cost of inflation goes down, the cost of your budget deficit goes down, your borrowing goes down, inflation goes down, unemployment goes down. I can continue. So you kill 20 birds with one small stone. Why can't you do it?
I'm sure you heard me yawn as you were talking, because you were talking like a normal human being. You were not talking like somebody who has been steeped in the Nigerian political tradition. The Nigerian political tradition since the Cocoa Massacre of 1898. Now, the way the Nigerian architecture is designed is not designed for the majority of Nigerians. It is designed for the security of the regime. The political calculation of somebody at the top of such a system is that if I don't keep these interest groups happy in January 2025, February 2027, which is when the election ostensibly will be, is still 25 months away. Between now and that 25 months, these people can do something that will topple me. So I have to keep them sweet. So what is it that I need to do to keep them sweet? And I'll give a very good example. Even the president's supporters, many of them, you see them coming to social media to beg for handouts. But then, when you point out to them that the very government that they are very vehemently supporting is pursuing policies that are impoverishing them, they come at you very viciously. So, there's a young PDP, Ilemona is not young anymore. Ilemona Onoja is a PDP operative. And he said something on Twitter yesterday, quoting somebody who attacked him. He said, I will never understand how people who are most affected by the bad policies of this administration are out defending to the point of calling death onto the matter. What was he replying to? Somebody told him that he will die because of his criticism of the government. And this person who told him that he would die because of his criticism of the government was in November begging people, please, I don't even have 2,000 naira. For the record, 2,000 naira is about $1.50 nowadays. The person was saying, I don't even have 2,000 naira in my account. How will my children eat this morning? By his grace. So you need to understand that there's something that has completely broken within the Nigerian system, and it has been broken for a very, very long time. It's not broken because of Tinubu. Tinubu is a beneficiary of that broken system. We had a chance to break out of that paradigm under Obasanjo. Obasanjo set us on the right track for all of his faults, and the man's faults are many. But unfortunately, over the subsequent years, we undermined those things that Obasanjo put in place. I would always tell a story of when I began to understand that Nigeria was really in a very bad place. It was during the 2013 governorship election in Anambra. I was doing election monitoring duty, so I could move around. And I got to a place called Umudim. It's not very far from Dewi. And I saw people collecting 3,500 naira each to sell their votes. So I called one guy, a man who slightly older than me, but he didn't look poverty stricken. I think that's the expression. So I felt I could reason with him. So I asked him, why are you selling your votes for? Don't you know that if you drop this, if you pick up this 3,500 naira, that's it, 4 years, the incoming governor will be unaccountable to you, blah, 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 and all of that. And the man looked at me like I was mad, and then proceeded to explain to me why it was important that he got that money. I said, he gave me an education that day. Again, it took me probably 7 years for me to finally disconnect, but we are playing very different games.
What did he tell you in summary? What did he tell you in summary? Just for my understanding, what did he tell you in summary?
In summary, there is a break. There has been a break between the outcomes. So they know, or the lower classes of Nigeria and the lower class of Nigeria are the vast majority of Nigerians. They know, they come to elections with the knowledge that after the elections, they will not hear from the politicians again. So for them, payday is election day. For them, payday is election day. And that's that. So we're playing very different games. And those of us who like to think that we are upper middle class or middle class and that we are intellectuals and that we will always lose this battle on the sheer weight of numbers because Nigeria has universal suffrage.
Okay. Okay, Chinata, let me take that answer for now. Let's go to unemployment. So we've talked about the three big red flags with the rule of law, unemployment, and inflation. Let's go on to unemployment. Like you said, NBS says that if you work so if you have a car, I use this example to explain unemployment numbers in Nigeria. If I have a car, I'm a banker, and NBS says I'm employed, so I am employed. I'm counted as employed. My neighbor has a son. That boy does not work. On Sunday, I pay that boy 500 naira or 1,000 naira to wash my car. So before I go to church, so he washes my car from say 7 a.m. to 8 a.m.
You're quite generous. Okay?
I'm just saying.
Oh, so it's 500.
Let's say I pay him 1,000 to wash my car from 7 a.m. till 8 a.m.
Bros, come and give me money.
According to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, that boy is employed. So it's a mess because that guy is clearly not employed. I'm being literal here, guys listening. If that guy works for 1 hour, he works for 1 hour to wash my car. According to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, he's employed. And even at that generous definition, we still have 96% Nigerians unemployed, even with that generous definition of unemployment. So, Cheta, and again, Nigerian population is very, very young. I looked at the population of Philippines. You know, most times in America, when you call a call center, you are calling India or the Philippines. I looked at the Philippines economy. I have some Filipino friends. They were mad that $1 was 56 Filipino, whatever. I don't know what it was. 56. They were mad. I was just looking at them. They were like, it was 55 last year. Now it's 56. So I was just looking at them. So I Googled Philippines. They have a youth employment about 96%. So out of every 100 Filipino youths, only 4 are unemployed. Only 4. If you don't have a job, go and do call center. And they speak English and they speak Spanish because they were colonized by the Spaniards before. So when you come back to Nigeria with this unemployment, really what is going on? Is it structural? Is it because because the bulk of our workforce is agriculture? Is it that we're no longer farming? Is it that the technology has moved away? Why can't we create jobs for Nigerians? I mean, what is the data telling us? What is the problem? We've identified inflation. What about unemployment? What's the data saying, and why is it a big, big, big problem in Nigeria?
So first things first, the Nigerian economy is not generating enough jobs, one. And one of the reasons why it's not generating enough jobs is energy. So Nigeria, and going back to the very first thing that we talked about in this discussion, I mentioned that I like to compare Nigeria with comparable economy. You remember that? So what is energy access in Egypt? What is energy access in Indonesia? What is energy access in Mexico? What is energy access in South Africa? And then what is energy access in Nigeria? In Nigeria, energy access is, I think, 65%. That was the last time I checked. 65% of Nigerians have access to power. These kind of statistics do not tell us the quality of power. How many of us, so I live in a place where I'm in band A. So I have lights, but I'm paying basically through my teeth for the lights. Just next door to me in Shankisha, light is a problem. So because we have this huge energy bottleneck, we are not generating enough jobs for people, because a huge part of the cost of setting up an industry in Nigeria is sorting your own power problem. That's one. Number two, you mentioned agriculture. Yes, subsistence agriculture used to employ a lot of people in Nigeria. It used to be a huge employer of people. But we have just spent a good portion of this discussion talking about how the various conflicts in Nigeria has, to put it in very blunt terms, made subsistence agriculture untenable. Just today, the Punch newspaper published a story titled Havens of Terror, Survivors Share Harrowing Tales Inside Kidnappers' Dungeons. And the very first person whose story they told, a guy called Kayode Ogunshade, who lives in Shagamu, was a farmer. It was a farm. He was the chief maintenance officer of a farm in Ogun State. Kidnappers entered the farm, seized him and other farm workers, killed his assistant to make the point to them. Just kill the assistant offhand, just so that every other person will cooperate, and then march them into the bush, into the forest. Eventually, they got to Papalanto. They were marching for 6 days. Eventually, a ransom of 30 million naira was paid for him. What was his annual salary? His annual salary was probably about 5 million naira. His family had to run around to find 30 million naira to pay for his release. But even at that, because of the trauma that he faced, the first thing he did when he finally was released was to resign from his job. That's somebody who has voluntarily become unemployed. In the UK, for quite a while now, they have been talking of they call them voluntarily economically inactive people. That's the English that the British are using. English is their native tongue. Now them invent English, so they know what language to use. The bottom line is that these are people who have, for whatever reason, decided by themselves to become unemployed. And in the UK, it's a huge problem. It's feeding into their immigration debates. In Nigeria, we're not even tracking those kind of numbers. Voluntarily unemployed people, who in many cases in Nigeria is because of because of insecurity issues like this. We have a huge IDP problem. There are a lot of internally displaced people in Nigeria. To most Nigerians, Nigeria is not at war. I would say that is not true. Nigeria has at the very least 3 million IDPs. We are up there with the DRC. We're up there with Somalia. We're up there with Syria. We're up there with Ukraine. We're up there with Yemen. What is the common thread with all of these countries? They are at war.
We're there with Yemen and Ukraine.
I can give you numbers. The DRC has 6 million IDPs. Somalia has 3.9 million IDPs. Syria has 6.9 million IDPs. Ukraine has 5.9 million IDPs. Yemen has 4.5 million. Nigeria has 3 million. We're up there. We have more IDPs in Nigeria than Iraq does. These are facts from the UNHCR. What is an IDP? I think it's important to define an IDP. An IDP is so basic. To put it in colloquial terms, an IDP is a refugee that has not crossed borders. So somebody who has been forced to leave his home as a result of either conflict or natural disaster, but is still within the borders of his own country. That is an IDP. So these IDP figures do not count the Nigerians who are displaced in Cameroon, the Nigerians who are displaced in Chad, and the Nigerians who are displaced in Niger, because we have displaced people in those countries. So when you have a complete mess such as this, because that is the only English word to define it, when you have a complete mess such as this, many of these IDPs used to be farmers. They used to be smallholder farmers who, again, coming back to what I talked about earlier with respect to some of the people that I interviewed in Benue years ago, they have not been to the farms for, in some cases, more than a decade. They have not passed on the knowledge of farming. That is an entirely new emerging problem that we will have to confront. But we are not even in stage one of acknowledging this problem. You cannot confront a problem that you not even acknowledge exists. So these are the things. Yeah, go on.
No, I hear you. I'm getting a lot of DMs. I want to run through a few topics with you if you don't mind, right? You mentioned energy. Let's now sort of dovetail now into the subsectors of energy and infrastructure. I want to talk about the biggest energy issue in Nigeria today, Dangote refinery, and the seemingly cold war or slow war with the NNPC. And also want to talk about, opening up the economy. I want to talk around the issues of ports in Nigeria. Because again, we're trying to diversify this economy, right? So that I'm the guy from Europe, I want to come to Nigeria. I see that maybe 90 or 80% of the goods in Nigeria go to just one port. That's number one. Number two, I see there's a $15 billion investment by a Nigerian in Nigeria. And that Nigerian is now getting the support, let's put it that way, from the government to supply him with crude oil. Risks and the economic blowback this is having. When you talk to your clients, do they ask you about what's happening to Dangote? Is it an issue they pick up on? Also, with
yes, they pick up on it a lot.
Okay, so if you can talk about that, and then possibly the port situation. I'm just curious that can we get ports outside of Lagos to work, link them by rail? That creates the productivity, because you talked about the food cost going up because we do not have that infrastructure to drive the productivity with the cold chains and all that. So that's why I'm bringing that in, to tie that back into inflation. So, but if you can speak around the Dangote, the energy side, because you've identified that as going to be the key thing towards relieving the unemployment numbers, that would help. So please go ahead. And after that, we'll allow some folks to speak. I have a few guys that requested to speak. Then we'll just take it from there. Chetak, go ahead, please.
Okay, you've asked so many questions in one question. This guy, did you spy in exams? Anyway, the problem between Dangote and NNPC so I'm going to summarize it at a very high level. It stems from the launch of his refinery. And that refinery threatens to disrupt the status quo in the country's oil sector. It brings us back to that thing that I talked about, vested interests. There are people who have, for years, made this thing, this has been their bread and butter, and they are powerful people. Dangote probably doesn't know what hit him. This is not to say that he's a good actor. Dangote is in it for his interest. But I think this is something that we must also come to terms with in Nigeria. For a long time, we seem to be wise to be consistently looking for good guys. Dangote is a capitalist who is in this for his interest. But then, how do we force his interest to align with the interest of majority of Nigerians? At this point, it appears that there is room for alignment. So, NNPC holds a 7% stake in Dangote's refinery, and they've clashed with him over crude supply agreements. Remember, NNPC, at least since the mid-80s, since the mid-1980s, which is pretty much almost all of my lifetime, they've struggled to meet their commitments to allocate crude oil and refined crude oil for Nigerians. That history of incompetence is also playing in the Dangote refinery. They made commitments when the refinery was being built. They made commitments to allocate crude oil to the refinery, but they struggled to meet that. They've cited pre-sold barrels, tied to debt obligations, all of that stuff. Again, the bad behavior that we all know and love NNPC for. So this has forced Dangote to import crude oil from outside the country. And that has raised fundamental questions about Nigeria to meet its domestic refining needs and its international obligations. Remember, the global crude markets, and I think it's important to point out that Nigeria has a highly diversified economy. Its government revenues that are not diversified. The global crude market depends on long-term contracts. If you want to play in that market, the global energy market is what I should say. The global energy market depends on long-term contracts such that if Carlo wants to supply gas to Slovakia, and Carlo and Slovakia sign a contract, it's not going to be a one-year contract. They are going to be looking for a contract that is 5 to 10 years. And once you sign that contract, you are committed to deliver as said in that period. One of the things that a lot of foreign people are looking at with keen interest is this kind of thing that is happening between Dangote and the NNPC, because it speaks to the ability or lack thereof of the NNPC to meet its agreements. The NNPC had pre-sold barrels and they had debt obligations before they signed the agreement with Dangote. So essentially, they signed the agreement with Dangote in bad faith. And then you expect this kind of bad behavior from what is still in practice your national oil company. Because forget all the thing about privatization and all of that. The government of Nigeria still has a huge vested say in what happens within the NNPC. So what the NNPC does is seen as government of Nigeria behavior. And they are behaving like this. Then, of course, there was all that drama of regulatory authorities accusing Dangote of seeking preferential treatments, and that's ended up welling more the tension. I won't speak to that. Dangote has a history of seeking preferential treatment. But then I would go so far as to say that he's a capitalist. And most capitalists, their ideal situation is monopoly. So the bottom line is that dispute, the whole NNPC versus Dangote thing, underscores the challenges of reforming Nigeria's oil sector. Now, the one that is really close to my heart, as somebody who comes from the lower Niger region of Nigeria, is this issue of ports. I would refer to an article that I wrote for Business Day back in 2019. We needed a Marshall Plan for the East, and I expanded with my thoughts, things that would not enter Business Day in a Medium post called "The Law of Unintended Consequences," which I'm going to tweet right now. So please just hold. If you can give me a second, let me do that. So I need to pick up my phone.
Go for it. And again, just while you're doing that, so if you after Cheta answers this, I'll let you guys maybe ask a question, so you can request to speak. I have the DMs already. I'll ask Cheta that, but once Cheta is done, if you had a question or just a very short question, you can request to speak or send me a DM, whichever you prefer. Hope you guys are enjoying the conversation. Some conversations are more impactful when you allow the resource person to just sort of speak. And Cheta is, we want to hear from those that track the risks in Nigeria. And I hope you guys are all, the DMs have been very, very active. Lots of folks hearing, understanding what's going on. So sometimes it's just good to listen in. Yeah, perfect. Cheta, once you're ready, you've got the floor.
Yeah, I've just done that. So sorry about that break in transmission, but it also allowed me to take a gulp of water. So the ports. I think that it's important to look first at the structure of Nigeria, the way the British designed it. Nigeria was not designed and I said this earlier. If you look at the map, Nigeria was not designed to serve the people within its borders. Nigeria was designed to be extractive. The original rail lines of the country were designed to bring out resources from the hinterlands, which is why we have those rail lines that run from Kaura, Namuda, and Nguru to Lagos and Port Harcourt, respectively. And the only place where they intersect traditionally is Kafanchan. So the rail lines were not meant to connect Nigerians together. They were meant to extract resources from the hinterlands to Lagos and Port Harcourt, and then from there send them on to Liverpool, where they were. So in the days of the oil rivers protectorates, they will extract palm oil from places in the east, around Enugu and the rest, put them on trains from Enugu to Port Harcourt, and then the palm oil will now enter a ship at Port Harcourt and then go to Liverpool, and that's where cousins will convert it to imperial leather, and then bring the imperial leather back to Nigeria and will buy it for a higher price. That was the economic model. Unfortunately, in as much as there was an attempt by the First Republic government to change that paradigm a bit, so they set up the Ikeja industrial estates around of Akran. They set up Bompai in Kano. They set up Transamad in Port Harcourt. There was an attempt, but number one, politics intervened. There was the coup. Those things were stillborn. Number two, and I think this is where the real damage happened. In the 60s, we had two economic corridors. We had the first national economic corridor, which ran along the Lagos to Kara Namuda rail line, which is the western rail line, the western artery of Nigeria's rail services. And then we had the eastern economic corridor, which ran from Port Harcourt all the way to past Maiduguri to Nguru. Now, after the war, because of Nigeria's peculiar way of sorting out the war, and I know that a lot of my people, Igbo people, do not like Gowon, but however way you look at it, Gowon was, for want of a better word, a good guy, in the sense that if it were not for Gowon, people like Murtada Mohammed would have actually dealt with us a lot more harshly after the war. Now, Gowon appointed somebody called Fabiasika to be the administrator of the East after the war. And there was a genuine, if not very competently done attempt to revive the economy of the East. But after Gowon was removed and the same Murtada Mohammed came to power, that was the end of it. And it was then that we saw things like Ajaokuta, the whole push to establish an iron ore, a steel industry in Nigeria, which should have been located closer to the raw materials, the iron ore fields near Onitsha. Instead, it was pushed to Ajaokuta. All those kind of things. Essentially, the Eastern Economic Corridor was abandoned. You can say, quote and unquote, it was done in order to punish the Igbos for daring to leave Nigeria. But you see, this thing, so the ports were basically left to follow. So where Port Harcourt had been a challenger to Lagos, the dredging that would have kept Port Harcourt active, it just basically all died. Now, the unintended consequences of all of this was that as time went on, over the years, the security challenges in Nigeria were concentrated along that eastern corridor. Because people forget, when you say the east of Nigeria, most people think of Igbo land. No, that's the southeast. And it's not necessarily even the pure southeast. Calabar is more southeast than Enugu. But again, that's another discussion. The east of Nigeria includes Port Harcourt, includes Enugu, includes Jos, includes Bauchi, includes Maiduguri. All of these all of these cities that I've just mentioned are on that rail line. All of these cities have been at the center of a lot of Nigeria's security crisis up until the last decade, when Nigeria's security crisis became more democratized and spread more around the country. That is an unintended consequence of abandoning one half of the country in favor of the other half. Another unintended consequence is the mess that Apapa has become. Apapa has become a complete mess. It's basically a non-functional port. The cost to clear goods in Apapa, both in terms of money and time, is so many factors more than it is in other comparable ports, whether it is Lube. There's a reason why the Nigerians, and it's not just because of that they both speak French. There's a reason why the Nigerians prefer to do the convoluted clearing of their goods in Lome or Cotonou rather than in Lagos, which Lagos would have made more sense because it is geographically closer to Niamey than either Lome or Cotonou. But they would rather go to Lome and Cotonou because the ports in Lagos are a mess. And they're a mess because A, the sheer incompetence of Nigerian bureaucracy, but B, because they are overloaded. Compared to our neighbors, Nigeria is an absolute behemoth. But this entire behemoth depends on Lagos. So Lagos is overcrowded, and that is killing Lagos. So we need to actually pay attention to other ports. And I will actually start with Ibaka, the one in Akwa Ibom, that the Akwa Ibom state government has been doing, and assorted people from Governor Emo to Senate President Akpabio have complained that they've not gotten as much cooperation from the federal government as they should. It's a national security priority. If we can get Ibaka up and running, and the reason why I choose Ibaka is that Rivers State has unique security challenges that we don't want to try to sort that before we get a port up and running. We need Ibaka up and running urgently to save Lagos. That's the irony. The whole idea of putting a port in Lekki rather than putting a port further up river in the south was just short-sighted. I looked for a polite word. It was short-sighted. So we need to get over our hang-ups. But you see, again, the problem, and it comes back to a political problem. The fundamental problem is that we have been taught to mistrust each other as a people or as a peoples within the framework of Nigeria. We don't trust each other. So what we play is zero-sum politics. In the Nigerian setup, the Yoruba man's loss is the Igbo man's gain, is the Fulani man's gain. And the Igbo man's loss is the Yoruba man's gain, is the Fulani man's gain. The Fulani man's loss is the Yoruba man's gain, is the Igbo man's gain. You cannot make progress with that kind of zero-sum politics, because what happens is that each of these people will be looking for ways to cause the others to lose, while not concentrating on how to make everybody grow. Our most fundamental issue is we need to grow Nigeria's pie. But the way we've set up our politics is we are destroying each other's pie, and as a result, all of us are shrinking downwards. There's an Igbo proverb: the man, when you are holding someone down, you are down yourself. And that's what we've been playing for a very long time. We need to change that paradigm.
You made a statement here that I think is going to be retweeted. It says, to save Lagos, we have to develop the ports outside Lagos. I hope people understand what you're saying, because this is one challenge when you have my Twitter space. I try to keep it economics, all that kind of stuff. I tweeted once about having a high... First of all, Cheta, in Nigeria, there are no horizontal rail lines in Nigeria. None. They all go from north to the south. Like you said, it's extractive to take the goods out from the north, raw materials, to the ocean and export them. But the trade in Nigeria, the biggest trade in Nigeria, the busiest route in Nigeria is Lagos-Ibadan. The trade in Nigeria is also west and east. That's where you have the largest concentration of small, medium-scale enterprises. I mean, you're talking of Lagos, Edo, Onitsha, Nnewi, Aba, all the way to Cross River. So if you build a high-speed rail, even if it's a cargo train, laterally, that's horizontally across Nigeria, you double the GDP seamlessly. Okay, even if you...
I just want to very, very quickly add something to what you have just said, because it's very important. Yes, the busiest road in Nigeria is Lagos-Ibadan. What's the second busiest road?
That would be going from Lagos to Benin.
Lagos Onitsha. Yes, you are right. But, and this I think it's important to point out that the Shagamu to Ibadan stretch, a lot of traffic tails off. It's important to point out that the reason these two roads are that busy is because all the goods in the country, whether they are going to Kano through the Lagos-Ibadan axis, or whether they are going to the east, to Port Harcourt, to Abuja through the Lagos-Onitsha axis, they use that Lagos-Shagamu stretch. So the absolute busiest route is Lagos-Shagamu. The absolute busiest route is Lagos-Shagamu. Why should you?
Go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead. Finish your thought. Finish your thought. I
yeah.
have a question.
Why should we put so much pressure on just one road? Even from a security standpoint, if somebody wants to choke off the country,
Just,
cluster bombs along
yeah.
that road, that's the end.
No, you blow up the bridge that connects Ojota, that one that takes from Lagos,
Exactly.
Ojota. Once you shut that one down, then Lagos
Finish.
can't
Finish.
Yeah, and it's big problem. But let me ask you a question. Let me come to Lagos State built a deep sea port, not the Lagos State itself, but investors came to Lagos to build a deep sea port. For those that don't understand what a deep sea port is, it's major. What it means is this: if you are abroad and want to export goods to Nigeria, you would find out that the Nigerian goods cannot fill a ship. No African goods can fill a ship. The way you say you are taking goods from Hong Kong to America, so one ship can fill everything that's going to the port of Los Angeles or the port of Shanghai. No. So what happens in, say, America is that they will load Senegal, they will load Lagos, they will load Ivory Coast, they will load Ghana on one ship, and they sort of stack them. So when you have a port, like a normal port like Lagos, it costs them more money. They have to come into the port, offload Lagos, go outside the port and continue. So it costs them time, it costs them money. When you have a deep port, what it means is that those ships prefer the deep port. They can, on the high sea, go to that deep port, offload everything for Lagos, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Senegal in that deep port and continue to, say, China. So every shipper in America, in the UK today, will prefer to go to the Lagos deep sea port because they don't have to come into Lagos. They just offload right there and move. So it's cheaper, it's more efficient. But Lagos built this, they partner with foreign folks, 20% equity. They built that deep sea port. It's in Lagos today. That thing is going to double the GDP of Lagos in the next years to come. Akwa Ibom.
Yes.
Akwa Ibom. Let me give this my question. Akwa Ibom has more money in quote than Lagos. Akwa Ibom, that axis holds the Senate presidency. That axis has the money. That axis needs the support. Why has that axis not been able? Because when Lagos built the deep sea port, they were not in government. If you understand my reasoning. The
Yes.
PDP,
But they were able to make the economic case.
exactly.
It brings us to quality of leadership.
Exactly.
Sorry to interrupt
No,
you.
no, you've got the question.
Yeah.
This is where I was going to. Why has that axis not been able to have the deep sea port, but Lagos in opposition was able to get a deep sea port? Even the Eco-Atlantic land is owned by the federal government. But Tinubu brought in Goodluck Jonathan to commission it. Because the Atlantic is owned by the federal government. So I'm just saying, why... This links you back up to your politics, economics. Well, talk about that. Why haven't they been able to get their quote-unquote act together to get that port? Well, the federal government is going to build them a port.
So... At this point, so number one, Lagos was already, I think it's important to go into some of the technicalities here. Lagos has a much lower draft than other parts of the country, and it has a natural harbor. So it doesn't need as much dredging as, say, Akwa Ibom. Remember that not geographically, not far from Akwa Ibom is where the continent changes shape. So it's easier for erosion to always bring sand in to make it more difficult for deep sea operations. But then again, the question is, do we need another deep sea port? My answer would be no. Since there's already one in Lagos, what I would argue is make the other ports, Koko, Warri Proper, Port Harcourt, One, and Ibaka. Again, Ibaka, very important. Make them arteries of the Lagos, the port of Lagos, the Lagos deep sea port. Even Apapa should become an artery. So the deep ocean going vessels, the huge ocean going vessels, go and offload in the Lagos deep sea port. And then instead of using the routes, we use smaller vessels to push goods to these other satellite ports. And that includes even ports in Tema. Again, because it's already a deep sea port, it's further out into the ocean. The nonsense that Nigerian customs does will not really affect it. And there's an example. You have the port of Los Angeles. It's one of the busiest container ports in the world. That's the model that they use. I think it was the port of Antwerp in Belgium that actually pioneered that model before Rotterdam did it better than them.
Düsseldorf. I mean, what's the one in Germany? The largest inland port. Is it Düsseldorf that has
Hamburg.
Is it Hamburg? The inland port, not the port itself.
Düsseldorf is an inland container port.
Correct.
But the port of Hamburg is the one that is closer to what the port of Lagos is meant to do. But the very best example, in my view, are both in Asia: Shanghai and Singapore. Singapore does not produce much, but they were able to, and this brings us back to to the unemployment question that you talked about later. So probably I would admit I didn't answer it as well as I could have because I missed this. Singapore looked at their location and found that they were sort of equidistant between London and New York in an easterly direction, which at the time was very major because till now, London and New York are still they are both in the top 5, probably number 1 and number 2 financial centers in the world. But they recognized that Asia was going to be the next big thing. So they concentrated on making sure that because we are equidistant in an easterly direction between London and New York, we should be that place that when people are going to sleep in London and people are waking up in New York, they can communicate through us. Back to our unemployment thing. So this is going back to an earlier question. We are in a very good time zone. We are literally on the same time zone with the majority of Europe at all times of the year. So currently, we're in the same time zone with Central European time. That is Madrid, Paris, Berlin, Rome, Amsterdam. We're on the same time zone with them right now. We are 1 hour ahead of London. In a few months' time, when daylight savings kicks in, we'll be on the same time zone with London, and all these other capitals that I mentioned will be 1 hour ahead of us. At any point in the year, we're either 6 or 5 hours away from New York. What this means is that call center thing, and then at the risk of sounding arrogant, we speak better English than the Filipinos. Because the Filipinos whom you talked about have they were colonized by the Spanish for 400 years, and then by the Americans for about 50. So we speak better English than the Filipinos. We should be able to run call centers. One of the complaints that friends of mine who are in the service industry have about Indian call centers, for example, is that because of the time difference, a lot of the time the Indians are probably asleep when people are active in the time zones that matter, quote and unquote. So that is something that we could do, but it is falling down on top of the altar of energy. How much will it cost? It's cheaper to run a call center out of India, by far cheaper, than it is to run a call center out of Nigeria. On top of energy, let's not talk about the fact that our telco networks have the quality of service has been falling because they've not been investing as much as they should, and for good reason. I can't blame them. So bringing it back to the ports, I'm not asking that we reinvent the wheel. The port of Lagos is already there. It's a deep sea port, but we need to revitalize all the other ports because we can no longer, because even as things offload from the port of Lagos into smaller vessels that go to their Apapa ports and then still enter the road and start going into Nigeria. The smaller vessels don't all have to go to Apapa. The smaller vessels can go to other parts and offload in other parts.
Just like a hub and spoke.
That is the model, hub and spoke. That is the model of Shanghai, hub and spoke. That is the model of Singapore, hub and spoke. That's the model of Rotterdam, hub and spoke. That's the model of Antwerp, hub and spoke. That's the model of Hamburg, hub and spoke. That is the model of Los Angeles, hub and spoke. If you are taking things to the eastern seaboard of the United States, you are except for oil and gas related stuff, you are likely going to go to the New York, New Jersey ports, and then from there get it into smaller vessels, either to Atlanta, to Savannah, and then up the Mississippi or to New Orleans. But you are not going to see a deep ocean-going vessel docking at New Orleans.
No. I mean, again, Shatta, just before we've been here an hour 30, we're going to do DMs now. Just to make the point again, we talked about food security. You're aware of what Lagos is building? The central food security network where they can buy food, keep it in warehouses, cold storage, so that it's there. During Christmas, they can release that food so that there's no food. Are you aware of that? I'm building it somewhere.
Yes, I'm very aware of that.
So that becomes.
It's a very great idea.
Game changer.
One may not have to like them to acknowledge that they are doing something good. My own doubts, as with such things, is always in implementation. And this is not a Lagos problem now; it's a Nigeria problem generally. We've had a problem with properly implementing. I once start. So this was 20 years ago now. My sister was doing a master's in Imperial College, Public Health. So I went to see her and I followed her to class. And so I sat down in class and I can never forget, the lecturer said something. He said, the best designed public health policy in the world is in Nigeria. This was accurate as of 20 years ago, 2005.
Nigerian state or Nigerian as a federation? What did
Nigeria as a federation? Nigeria as a federation. I mean, somebody like that is probably to be looking at. So he said the best designed public health policy is Nigeria, but it is very poorly implemented.
Interesting.
So apparently, our public health policy, at least as of that time, copied a lot from Cuba, but was able to look at things where the Cubans did not get very right and then improve of them. But this is in the design documents. When it came to implementation, everything fell apart.
I see where you're going with that. I mean, I see where you're going with that.
When it came to implementation, everything fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. You're right. Yeah, if you pull up the vision, go ahead.
It's only that I tweet about quite a bit. That whenever a new project is launched in Nigeria, people are celebrating and all that. I don't. I want to see this project in 5 years. And almost every time, pretty much every time, you come back in 5 years, the whole thing has fallen apart. So so on paper, the Lagos plan, it's a great plan. I'm not going to, but I want to see it let's come and discuss it in 2030.
Okay.
Let's see how it's
Let's end with this. Let me throw this at you. The Chinese have developed where they've gotten to by doing this 10-year planning, not just 10-year planning, whereby they're picking leaders like a relay race. So if you are going to be the next premier of China in 10 years, today you would be in the Politburo. 10 years ago, you would be a governor of a place. 10 years away, you'd be a local government chairman. No, you are developing yourself. They are picking you up the triangle. So by the time you get to the Politburo or whatever they call it, right, you have managed, you've managed local government, states, ministries. You are proven. Then you become the premier. It's one party. It's one trained leadership succession plan. Everyone knows what they are doing. They have to build a rail from here to here. It's in the 20-year plan. This year plan, we're going to get the iron rods. Next year, we're going to get the cement. Whatever we're going to build. It's there. It's not going to change. Can the case be made that when you look at Lagos State and how you have had the Tinubu, Fashola, however you want to take it all the way, do you think they have benefited? Is this a benefit that they have been able to, in Lagos particularly, from this long succession planning? I remember when Tinubu was redeveloping the roads on Marina, the Marina, where he took away all the road and they rebuilt it now to where they buried the cables. People don't know, before he came, the cables were all over the place. They buried them, did that Julius Berger thing in Marina, and it sort of continued. Do you think there's an argument that perhaps this continuity in policy and personnel has given Lagos an advantage? And is there an argument to be made for it to be copied? I'm throwing it out there. What do you think?
No, you look at the data, it's unarguable. I would even go further and say that Akwa Ibom has done a better job of that than Lagos. It's just that, number one, Akwa Ibom is coming from a much lower base. Don't forget that that Lagos was federal capital for 87 years. So they already had a very good base to start from as compared to Akwa Ibom. It's also unarguable that Akwa Ibom, a lot of money that could have gone into developing Akwa Ibom has disappeared. Akwa Ibom at a point was getting revenues comparable to Dubai. But in terms of share continuity, Akwa Ibom has done an excellent job. Again, both Lagos and Akwa Ibom have fallen on the altar of implementation. It could have been better implemented. If you want to look at the Tinubu operation from 1999 till today, just on its own singular merits, as in purely without any external intervention, as it were, look at Lekki. Because when Tinubu took over in Lagos on May 29, 1999, that area from after Mobile's former office to Lekki was more or less a blank slate. The only thing that was really there was the roads Jakonde built from Victoria Island to Ekpe. So that area as it is now is Tinubu's true legacy in Lagos. But yes, within a state in Nigeria, I think it's important to point out this within a state, because with the exception of Delta, Plateau, Benue, Nasarawa, I think Cross River, and Kogi, there are 6 states. The other 30 states in Nigeria are largely, and I use the word very carefully, are largely ethnically homogeneous. So it is easy, especially in terms of their politics. So it is easier when you have them to have this kind of continuity. China is 90% Han Chinese. So it's easier to have this kind of continuity when you remove that political brinksmanship that comes with various ethnic interest groups fighting against each other. What I'm just saying in a long-winded way is that Nigeria as an entity may not be able to benefit from this kind of thing, because the moment, and I think it is now unarguable, we have 26 years going of data that shows it, that when Obasanjo came, he was pro-business, slightly smaller government, not as expansive, and then he left office. Yar'Adua came. Yar'Adua was immediately, I won't go so far as to say anti-business, but he constrained business and expanded government. Then Jonathan came, when the Obasanjo route again. And then Buhari came. And then Buhari was immediately anti-business and expansive government. Tinubu has come. Tinubu's instinct is pro-business. A lot of people will say chronic capitalist. I will not argue with them. And smaller governments. But because of all the political deals he has made, he cannot afford to constrain governments. You understand? But his instinct is for smaller governments. You can see that in Lagos. Let me rephrase it: a more streamlined government operation. But again, it's important to keep pointing out the political deals he has made means that his hands are tied in terms of they've made the noises. They talked about implementing the Aron Saye report and all of that, but they've not moved on them because they are political deals that he has made. So we now have data that shows that irrespective of party, the instinct of the two Captina presidents that we've had, I wouldn't go so far as to say northern president, because I'm very sure that if a Kanu person, a pure Kanu person becomes president, he will be pro-business. But the instinct of the two Katsina presidents we've had have been massive government constrained business.
Socialist.
The instinct of, I wouldn't say socialist. It's not socialist. It's so you are falling into that trap of taking the American definition of socialism. Denmark is a socialist country, but Denmark does not constrain business.
The Danish economy can be socialist, i.e., like the way all the Scandinavians are, but they don't control business. But you have a president that sends the secret police into the largest foreign investor in your country. That's what we did in the last years under Buhari. We sent the secret police.
So that's not socialist. That's not socialist. There's a difference between Stalinist and socialist.
What of taking money to give to poor people?
That is socialism. Socialism, and that's what they do. No, you talked about the secret police, and like I said, you are making the mistake of conflating the American definition of socialism, because the American definition of socialism is basically anything that is not laissez-faire capitalism. That's the way the Americans would define socialism. So, which means that we would include everything that is not their kind of capitalism. So, for example, the British NHS. Whenever the Conservatives come into power in the UK, they are looking for ways to constrain the NHS, for ways to cut it down, because the Conservatives, especially through all those, their think tanks like the IEA, have bought into the American definition of capitalism. That is not that definition is not socialism.
I mean, let's go on a small argument here, right? So if you have a president that says, let me let you know.
Buharism is closer to Stalinism. Stalinism is a perversion of communism, which in itself is the far left end of socialism. So socialism is a broad spectrum. And your average European government, mainland European government, is socialist. France is socialist. They spend massively on healthcare. They spend massively on social. There's redistribution of wealth. All the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, all of them, they tax very heavily in order to redistribute.
What would you call China?
China is, in short, let me define it the way the Chinese themselves define it. Socialist with Chinese characteristics.
So, but are they socialist in China?
They are a hybrid model.
Exactly. This is the point. So
they are a hybrid model. So they have socialist aspects and they have capitalist aspects.
They are more capitalist than they are communist. They had a lower tax rate than America before Trump came.
The Chinese themselves do not define themselves as communists. I think it's very important to put.
But the name of the party is what? What's the name of the party?
The name of the party is the Communist Party, because that's what. But they define it as socialists.
I hear you, and I don't want us to get hooked on the words. The point I'm trying to make is that if you come into office and refineries have been privatized and you reverse them and you give it back because the labor unions asked you to, if you come into office and you find the largest foreign direct investor in your nation, a fine larger than their annual revenues for 3 years because they broke a fine. We can call it. We can define it. No, we can define it how we define it, but it's anti-business. But yes, I get the point of it.
And I did say that these two presidents, Yar'Adua and Buhari, were anti-business. I did say that off the bat.
All right.
Again, we now have 26 years of data that makes that case.
All right, Chasa. Last thing we're going to talk about, and it's just going to be a statement, right? It's how really that Delta has not been able to match the Lagos and Akwa Ibom model. Delta gets more money than any state in Nigeria. If you look at it in terms of the 13% that come to them as a direct, it's a direct credit alert, right? And it's a very, very functional state. I.e., the people in Delta State are not laggards. If you pull up the bank big boys that from Delta, the industrialists, still the state has not been able to harness those folks and turn Delta into Houston. It should have been done. But
the problem with Delta specifically is the vintage Nigerian problem. Remember, a few minutes ago, I listed the states in Nigeria that you cannot have that economic succession in, the economic planning succession in, because they are not ethnically homogeneous, and Delta is one of them.
But is that enough to say you receive all this money? And is that enough? Is that enough?
Even Akwa Ibom, I mentioned that Akwa Ibom at some point were receiving revenues similar to what Dubai was receiving, and a lot of money disappeared. So we need to, again, it brings us back to that thing of, in Nigeria, and this is something that we need to find a way. If Tinubu can find a way to successfully divert the attention of most Nigerians to the states, to their states, so that they can start holding the governors more to account. Then he would have done more for Nigeria than everybody else has done since 1966.
I agreed.
But the problem is that, again, the kind of politics he has played means that it is difficult for that to happen. Because when I say turn the people's attention to their states, I am not saying turn the people's attention to their states where their ancestors came from, but the states where they are tax residents. I am tax residents in Lagos.
Yeah,
but the moment
that's where you've lost. That's where you've lost the room.
Yeah, the moment I start to try to talk about the fact that, okay, in Ikosike to where I live, that's Kosofe, this is the issue. One idiot will come out and tell me, go back to Anambra. That is not holding the state to account.
True. I hear you. I hear you.
In advanced democracies, they say very clearly, no taxation without representation. You should not have the right to come and take something from my income and then turn around and tell me that I shouldn't have the right to question how it is spent.
And Cheta, let's also say this, Cheta. If the VAT debate, if the VAT and the tax reform debate happens, it means that population becomes a generator of commerce, i.e., if you have a larger population, by default, you're going to share more of the VAT. So states now, just like in the US, will be struggling to attract immigrants. If let me use that word. If you can,
the VAT debate is a necessary thing to happen. I support the government on that. I see some of the sleight of hand that they are using to push it through. They are going to push it through. They will push it through. It will not be in the form that it is currently, but they will push it through.
What do you mean? The tax reform or the VAT reform? I believe that the tax reform will be pushed through. That's what you're saying.
The VAT reform will go through as well.
Okay, good. Because there are 4 bills and okay, perfect. Okay, yes. So that will be okay.
The question is in what form would they go through, but they will go through.
Okay, perfect. So this gives us a chance to, just to reset the room, guys. When we're here nearly 2 hours talking with Cheta of SBM Intel, we're talking about the macroeconomic and systematic risks for Nigeria 2025. I give him the example of a foreigner doesn't know Nigeria, wants to invest in the emerging market. Nigeria pops up on his Bloomberg screen. He's asking Bloomberg, what are the top 3 risks? We've identified number 1, rule of law. Number 2, inflation, together inflation and of course unemployment. And Cheta has taken us through a deep dive around these issues, linking inflation, unemployment, power, lack of jobs, why the country is the way it is. It's been very, very impactful, Cheta. Let me now allow folks to come in. I have a few questions for Cheta from DMs. A guy here, I'm not sure if I can want me to mention his name, is basically saying that you are quoting let me quote it, in fact, comparing figures of IDP with that of other nations without a base figure, such as mentioning percentage of displaced people or farmers creates. So essentially you are saying so this 3% you are quoting, is it of the population of the country? If my population is 100 million and all that, just, yeah.
See, it doesn't matter what percentage of the population is. I think that's a red herring kind of argument.
Okay.
The bottom line is that we have 3 million human beings that are displaced within our borders. The impact of 3 million human beings being displaced down the value chain is huge. Whether it is 3 million out of 100 million displaced or 3 million out of 50 million, it is a significant number of human beings. 3 million human beings will need to be sheltered, they will need to be fed, and if you take, there's no economy, even the Chinese economy, where if you remove 3 million potentially productive people from that economy will not feel it in some way. So again, it is a travesty that ostensibly we are not at war in Nigeria, and I use the word ostensibly. That's the operating word there, because if you start going into war studies by the political science definition of war, we are at war. But again, that's another discussion entirely. But ostensibly, to most Nigerians, because they are in places that are far flung from these crises, we are not at war. yet we have 3 million internally displaced people. That's a problem.
Gotcha. Okay, Chita, let me get is it Chikwelu? Then of course after that we'll get Tushabero to speak. Real quick, guys, we have about a 30-minute window more or less. So is it Chikwelu? Please go ahead. Chita is here. What's your question?
Yeah, good. Carlo, thank you very much for having us. Cheta, like I hardly go up here to talk. You blew my mind. Cheta, first of all, I want to ask you a few questions. Carlo, please just avail me 3 minutes. Cheta, you say your firm research for external entities like Bloomberg. You said, am I correct? You said in the beginning.
We do work. So the Bloomberg work. The Bloomberg research was they were putting together a report. They reached out to us. There's nothing that suggests that it's a paid engagement, but we do work for external organizations.
So if I interpret that, it means everything you're saying here. I am not holding you or anybody. Everything you're saying here. External entities like the Bloomberg and the Bill and Melinda Gates and all that, they have this information, but Nigerian government don't have this information or have it and decide not to work with it. That's one. I'll reel out the whole thing, then I'll allow you to address it, right? So I listened to you, Cheta. Please, I'm going to say something before I continue. I hope you're writing a book. I've said this to Obereri when he came on Carlo's space. Carlo has written a book. We are all reading it. Don't die with all this stuff that you have. Please put it down. You can collaborate with Carlo.
One day, I'm not going to die just yet. I will die one day.
I know.
I need to bury my father first.
I hope you understand where I'm going with this, right?
I hope so too.
Yeah. The only way this will last is not just coming to space to talk about it. Please put it down. You can collaborate with Carlo to give it economic connotation, but please put it down. So my question, I have 2 questions, right? The first question, from everything you have said, I've always I always believe that nothing happens in the world by isolation. So when I look at Nigeria's situation, be it in the east, be it in the west or in the north, I always zoom out to say, what role do we play at the international level? Because there would always be, it's a big machine everybody plugs into, right? Looking at Nigeria, the challenges that we have, do you think is self-inflicted, or are we getting pressure from external elements? And if we are, do you think we can untangle that by ourselves? That's one. Number 2, given everything you have said, all the risk analysis that we've discussed, right? Where do you think Nigerians that want to put their money in Nigeria should put their money when it comes to investments? Because this is an economic space.
Omo. So the first question is not a single question. It probably deserves an entire discussion on its own. Because Nigeria, like a majority of African countries, it doesn't make sense in purely contiguous geographic terms. So I'll give an example that I've given in so many various fora that I've discussed in. And I think it's important to put that because it gets at the heart of Nigeria's political economy. I'm Igbo. My wife is Yoruba. We once had, because I wanted my children to learn French from an early age. So we hired a nanny for the children from Cotonou, Bella. Now, Bella couldn't speak much English. Her English was quite poor. I speak enough French to prevent me from being kidnapped, or at least to beg kidnappers not to kidnap me. Not much, but it will just get me buy. I can ask for the price of stuff, that kind of very basic French. So between my weak French and Bella's almost non-existent English, and then our hands, I could communicate with Bella. My wife, on the other hand, who does not speak French at all, she knows bonjour, she knows merci. That's pretty much it. But she and Bella communicated to perfection. How did that happen? Very simple. They spoke Yoruba. People tend to forget that prior to the Berlin Conference of 1884, that the Oyo Empire had influence all the way to Dahomey, and they spoke a mutually intelligible language, which we would now call in Nigeria Yoruba, and in Benin they would call Fon. But this language, in terms of the language continuum, all the way to Togo, people spoke this language. The same thing happened in what we now call northern Nigeria. So, for example, last year, when, not last year anymore, 2 years ago, when there was that coup in Niger, and eventually Nigeria sent an envoy called Sanusi Lamido Sanusi to talk with the Nigerian junta. The language that they spoke in that meeting was not English or French. They needed interpreters. They simply spoke Hausa. If you cast your mind back, the majority of opposition to President Tinubu's plan to invade Niger and return it to democracy was from northern Nigeria. Because those people historically are their brothers. Cast yourself back to 2019 when Buhari was campaigning for re-election. The governors of Zinde and Maradi in Niger came into Nigeria to campaign with Buhari because they are one people. So this is a problem that the Europeans caused for us. If you go around the continent, you can see these problems pretty much in the Maasai people are in both Kenya and Tanzania. When you talk of Zulus, everybody thinks South Africa, but the historical capital of Zululand is Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. So you have this issue around the continent where peoples were divided, and in many cases put together with people that they had nothing in common with historically, and in many cases historical animosity towards. They were put together and called one country. And then when most African countries got independence around the 1960 mark, we kept those borders. Fortunately or unfortunately, however we want to look at it, what has happened over the 141 years now since the Berlin Conference is that new identities have developed, have evolved. So we cannot go back to the old identities of antiquity, but we need to learn how to come together with and create and forge and tighten these new identities so that they can begin to make sense and to work. Unfortunately, and this is where to come to your question, I'm looking for the right word here. The truths in between the three things that you said, what roles we play at the international level, whether we're getting pressure from external elements, and what is our role. The truth is somewhere in between. External elements, of course, have interest in what is happening. They would have an interest in maintaining the current order of things, and if it suits their agenda of remaining on top, of course they will mess us up. So one thing that we keep constantly making a mistake about is thinking that international politics, international geopolitics is because people like us or because people are nice. No, it's about naked interest. People will act where their interest leads them. Napoleon said a man will protect his interest more than he protects his rights. That thing is true in more than 200 years since Napoleon said it. It will be true 500 years after we are all gone. People will protect their interest more than they will protect their rights. So the first thing that we need to do is identify our interests. Once we can identify our common interests, we can begin to work ruthlessly towards this. Personally, I feel that the common interest of the entity called Nigeria is to provide a decent standard of living to everybody who lives within the broad borders of Nigeria. The entity called Nigeria was not constructed in that way. We spent a bit of time talking about the rail lines and how and what or what not. The entity called Nigeria was not constructed to provide a decent standard of life for Nigerians. In short, think about it this way. In the 100 years of colonialism from 1861 to 1960, there was no point in time A where there were more than 500 Englishmen in Nigeria. 5,000. Sorry, there was no point in time in that period where there were more than 5,000 Englishmen in Nigeria, and that's being generous. Yes, Nigeria was constructed to provide those people a standard of life higher than they would get in England. And when we got independence in quotes in 1960, because I like something that a professor in the US called Richard Wolff said. He said, there's no political independence without economic independence. We got political independence, but we didn't get economic independence. So I always say independence in quotes. When we got independence in quotes in 1960, we did not change that paradigm. So Nigeria, as we know it, has never at any given point in time worked for maximum, and this being generous, maximum 50,000 people within the country. We need to change that. I think my own belief is that the interest of the geographic expression, to quote Obafemi Awolowo, called Nigeria, is to work for a majority of the inhabitants of that geographic expression. To answer your second question, where do you think Nigerians that want to put their money in Nigeria? I'm not going to answer that question. Forgive me. I charge for that particular question. So you can DM me. I will send you an invoice and we'll have a discussion.
Okay, good job, Cheta. Let's get Tush Hagbero. Did I get that right? At XX111.
Yes,
Carlo,
you did.
Carlo, before Tush goes on, Cheta, you didn't say anything about writing a book. I need you to write a book. I just want to emphasize that.
All right. But Cheta's on a time clock. I want to get all his questions in. And I got MK. I think he has taken your comments in under advisory. He might have a plan, he might not have a plan, but sometimes people don't want to say what they're gonna do. So thank you so much on that. Let's get Tush. Tush, what's in your mind?
Hello, Mr. Carlo. Good evening. Hello, Cheta. Good evening. Fantastic discussion so far. I could listen to both of you talk for quite a long time. So I have a request and a question for you, Cheta. And I think I'll lead with the question first. It's a little bit of a personal question. And you spoke a bit about the current energy resource poverty going on in Nigeria. And personally, I sometimes travel for work and I move around, even friends, relatives. There is currently a crisis going on in Nigeria. There are large pockets of areas in Nigeria where young people live and they barely get up to 2 hours supply of electricity per day. It's ruining the productivity of the young generation we have now. And it leaves me feeling like the future is bleak. So I'd like to know, is there any personal suggestion you have that you could give to young people that are facing this energy resource poverty on how to navigate it in order to be productive? Because
what does that mean in English? Energy. Are you saying you don't have power and you?
Correct. So there are large swaths of areas in Nigeria currently where people don't have power. So it leads into you can't function, right? If you have a remote job, it's almost impossible for you. You have to keep working for cafes. And if your income is not up to a certain level, it's just totally impossible for you. So yeah, that's what I mean. Then the request for Cheta would be, I'm a big fan of your written articles on Medium, but I would like to humbly plead that I would love to read longer forms of your thoughts published on Medium. Simple as that. Thank you so much.
Cheta, you have any suggestions on how he can power? I mean, that's a big problem. You highlighted it. Is there anything you can say on that?
Well, see, it's in my view, the power thing is simple yet complex, and a lot of it's about political will. We made a massive error when, as a country, when we did privatization back in 2011, when we privatized generation and distribution, but did not privatize transmission. And that speaks to one of the core problems of the Nigerian establishment, the Nigerian state. It's obsessed with control. So you see how difficult it has been for the Nigerian state to let go of subsidies on petrol, how difficult it has been for the Nigerian state to let go of subsidies on the naira, and how difficult it has been to let go on the transmission grid. I think that the solution to power ultimately is that we have to leapfrog into renewables. And quote and unquote, luckily the Chinese are there for us. The ideal thing would be if we can research our own problems ourselves, but clearly we have other things to fight about like, for example, whether Yoruba is better than Igbo and that kind of stuff. So we are not going to do that research. But I think that as time goes on, the cost of renewable power, such as solar, is going to come down. And when it comes down, when the economies of scales add up, what we are going to see is that more people will opt out of the grid and will do their own. They will have their own power. So time will solve that problem. That's my own opinion. The question is how much time. Is it going to be when I'm retired, or is it going to be soon? Regarding longer forms of my articles and all of that, when I'm less busy, like I think yes, I've been thinking of writing a book, and my friend Tunde Leye has been. He writes fiction. He's been really harassing my life on that matter. So I think I should do it. The question is when. I mean, between the struggle to put food on the table. So perhaps when my children go off to university and then they are no longer there to bother me, then I'll do that. I don't know.
I think you should get a ghostwriter and record on a tape. That's what you should do right now. Just record on a tape audio, so it's easy. Then get a ghostwriter to just write it out for you. Because that's because if you ever wait, you're not gonna get it done, Cheta. Just if you wait to be ready, you're not gonna get it done. Just my suggestion for you. And Cheta, you don't have to answer.
Okay, I'll think about that.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me that I'm big enough for that.
Yeah, just do that. Yeah, I have a few guys that I wish I could scare those guys. I've forgotten them. That they write out the manuscript for you. So if you record, they can listen to it and then they can write it out. So it's basically your own words, but the pros and the points, if you don't have the time, they write out for you. So yeah, because I think people would like to hear what you have to say in that format, literally. So you have a lot to tell. I mean, and I was going to ask, not for you to answer really, but to say just rhetorically, is power a money issue in Nigeria or an implementation issue? If we got $1 trillion, would we solve power, or was it going to go down the food and refinery rabbit hole that we have the money but we can't get it done because we have vested interests? I just want one word answer. Is it a money thing on
vested interests?
Vested interest. Well, now I'm scared. Okay, let's get MK. MK, you've got the floor. MK. Let's get MK. Is that Abubakar or something? MK going once. Onyeka, you hop right in. MK is getting ready. Abubakar, hop right in. Onyeka, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Now, in China, there is nothing like private power. In China, the government provides power for the citizens at a rate that encourages industrialization and development. It was like that 20 years ago. It is like that today. This idea that we must privatize power in Nigeria and display market rates, is it your view that power should be available in Nigeria at market rates, or at a rate that will encourage somebody's making?
MK, can you mute? Yeah, I've muted. Or you can go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so is it your view that the power should be provided at market rates or at a rate that will encourage and spur development, industrialization, whatever? I just want to have your take. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And who said that market rates cannot support development? I think that power should be available at market rates.
But Cheta, can we afford that? Let me doctor on this question.
I'm going to answer. I'm going there. I like to think. So I think it's important for us to recognize something. We do not currently possess the strategic depth to subsidize power anymore. We just don't have it. So in life, everything, you cut your coats according to your clothes. I think that, again, and it brings us to the competing kind of interest we have in Nigeria. A better way, in my view, if we were to continue running public power in Nigeria, would have been that we divert power first to industrial areas to help bring down the cost of power. Again, economies of scale. If you can provide the power and this is the way markets work, in places where they really work. Not where, because one of the problems with Nigeria, when we say markets, we tend to introduce distortions into the market all the time. So that's something to put to one side, because it is an elephant in the room that we must acknowledge. Removing the distortions. If we have everything right, with economies of scale, the market cost for power will go down. And I think it's very important for us to put that into perspective. So, if we do something like this, we closely identify the industrial areas, your Apapa industrial layout, your Obakran industrial layout, your Bompai, if that can be revived, your Transamadi industrial layout, all these kind of things. And then make sure that these places which, during the course of the day, absorb a lot of people to make our industries work and provide employment and get people off the streets. If we do that and we prioritize making sure that those guys have power, and because of economies of scale, they can get power cheap, you will find that those places will generate revenue for the government, revenue for the people, such that power can begin to expand outwards from those places. There's a country that did something like that. That country is called China.
Yeah, I mean, what I still can't understand is why we can't. I mean, most people why can't we just have power? Because in essence, power is just a bigger generator. So if I want to have power in my house, I go buy a generator, I put energy in the generator, it gives me power. All the dams and all are simply that same thing. It's just a bigger power that is more efficient. I just think people just can't understand why this can't be done. NEPA, I grew up with NEPA. And now, it's just amazing, really, to me. MK,
NEPA was a lot better.
NEPA was a lot better. NEPA was a lot better.
Because a fundamental problem, and it comes back to the money problem, we have not invested in these grids. These grids, and it's the same thing with our oil infrastructure. We build them and we forget about them. You have to consistently invest in maintaining them. You have to consistently invest. There's a reason why, for example, the mobile networks in Nigeria are beginning to deteriorate. Because the mobile companies, especially after the MTN fine, the mobile companies have stopped or have cut down on investments. They've cut down on investment because of regulatory problems, which the fine falls on that. They've cut down on investment because of security. So that's it. So we have a national grid that was built in the 1970s. I will go so far as to say that majority of us on this, listening to this conversation, were not around in the 1970s. I came in at the tail end of the 1970s. So So, and these things were built in the early 70s, so about a decade before I came around. And we haven't invested in so forget about upgrading. We haven't invested in maintaining.
Yeah, I mean,
So then we expect it to keep working for 50 years.
yeah, the one thing that hit me was when Bart Nagy was energy minister, and he said that was the first time in Nigeria's history we had renovated the Kanji Dam. That hit me. The first time
Kanji Dam was built in 63.
Correct.
In 63.
And he was the first.
That's 62 years ago now.
Correct. But so let's just get the last question from MK, because I know we were on a time clock. MK, glad you're able to make it. MK, you've got the floor. Please go ahead. MK going once, MK going twice. MK, I want to give you that chance to speak. Okay, Cheta, let me just thank you for coming to the space today. Really appreciate the discussion. I wish we can stay longer. Usually we're here for 3 hours minimum. We do long form. All the guests can ask questions, but I knew we were gonna drop a lot of bombs in quotes. Hence, I wanted us to just have that discussion so that we can understand your insights and appreciate your understanding of Nigeria for us. We really didn't even go into the investment side. We just stopped at the rule of law, employment, and inflation. I think everyone has left here with a better understanding of how these three things are all linked in. I think the point you make about the president being tied up, he has his instincts to do these things that will make the government function seamlessly, but it's a bit tied up. And I think we're seeing that in the tax reform bill, where there's a bill, in my view, is going to work for the Nigerian economy to make it more efficient, to make it more productive. But it's been tied up with, we don't like it. No one has said what they don't like, but we just don't like it. So thank you for coming. If you have any closing thoughts, we can hear them. And then basically, we just want to appreciate you. So Chesa, you've got the floor to make your closing argument.
Okay, thanks for having me. Closing arguments, to be honest, I don't have much to say. And let me tell you why. I guess that some of these things they come and they go. So for the past year and a half, quite a number of people have sent me DMs or sent tweets as to why I don't speak on radio anymore, why I don't tweet as much. For the past year and a half, I've been sort of like extremely frustrated, to the point of giving up. Like the problems of Nigeria seem completely insurmountable. But like I said, these things come and go. Probably it's my time to be frustrated and just give up. Probably a time will come when I will be at the other end again, filled with energy and hope. Remember that when we first discussed doing this, I was not as keen, but you said that it was an important talk, and hey, we have a relationship. So I was able to say, okay, fine, I will drag myself out of bed literally and do this. Guys, I think a key important thing that we must put in mind is that the way our country was constructed does not make for a good economic argument. We need to essentially tear it all down and rebuild it in a way that it will make sense. Otherwise, we can very easily be having the same conversation in another 100 years, and that would be extremely sad. But that's it. It's what it is.
All right. So just a last question, and it's going to be a word answer for you. If you know a guy that has jackpot, and would you advise them to come back to Nigeria? That's a loaded question.
Not until you get the foreign passports.
So if they had a foreign passport and they had it, so you would say, okay, come back because they had a plan B.
Yes.
Why?
And I mean, so I can use myself as an example. 20 years ago, I lived in the UK, studied there, was working there, and then the global financial crisis happened, and I was a few months away, just over a year away from permanent residency, indefinite leave to remain. But I was like, hey, my country seems to be on the up. There was a period of Africa rising and all of that. And so I left all of that and came back home. I think it's probably the one thing that I regret the most in life. And for the simple reason that at least permanent residency of the UK would have given me options. And it comes with understanding Nigeria and how Nigeria was constructed a bit better, which is something that has come to happen in my line of work. Basically, because of the way Nigeria was constructed, and because we have refused to have these honest conversations about why Nigeria is the way it is. Until we have these honest conversations, we don't have a hope of doing the necessary reconstruction. And I think that's important to point out. Until we have those honest, and they will be painful conversations. They will by default be painful conversations. But until we have them, we can't reconstruct it, and then we can't have a hope of the country working. So until that happens, we will be susceptible to this period, these cycles of hope and doom and gloom. That's what's going to keep happening. There will be a period where things will suddenly start looking better. We'll hope everybody go enter plane, come back. And then suddenly it will take just one wrong electoral decision like we made in 2015, and suddenly everything will just scatter. And then you find people heading for the bridge, for the exits again. This is the current Japa wave is the fourth great immigration wave since 1960. It's the fourth. So in that and in all of them, there's one common thread. If you look at the outcomes, the ultimate outcomes of those who left, whether it was in the great immigration wave of the Civil War, or the great immigration wave of 1980s, or the great immigration wave of the 1990s, if you look at the outcomes of those who left and stayed, on the average, they have had better outcomes than those who came back home. It's important to put that down. So when I see people arguing on social media, and then they will point out, so for example, in some of the silly North versus South arguments that I see, when assorted Southerners, is I think one thing that puts the Igbo ethnic crew on Twitter and the Yoruba ethnic crew agree on is that Northerners are lazy, that kind of stuff. And then you now see their Northern counterparts defend and say, but we have Dangote. Dangote is one person. What are the average outcomes? Those are the questions that I should ask. And on average, those who left Nigeria at whatever time period and then stayed away, their average outcomes have been better than the outcomes of those who came back home. It's a bitter truth, but it is a truth. So if I were to give that advice to anybody that says that they want to leave and all of that, I would say at the very least, stay until you get the passport. It gives you movements.
On that's very thought-provoking, Cheta. Very, very thought-provoking. Well, on that note, guys, let me just thank you, Cheta, for coming in here. I'll be spending time.
Carlo, sorry for cutting in. I'm trying to DM Cheta, but I cannot. Cheta, please, can you make that possible, please?
All right, perfect.
Okay, no problem.
All right, yeah, just Cheta, thank you so much. I understand. Again, you are a very busy guy, and I'm appreciative that you were able to come to the space, the first one for the year. So what we're trying to do this first month, of course, is to get you set up for the year coming. December, we got you set up. We're talking about budgets, talking about how to invest, asset allocation, talking about how you can do your asset planning. We did all that in December. Now, January, we're talking about the macro. We're doing top down. What are the big issues? We're now going to the little ones of what stocks to buy, but the big issues, right? That's what Cheta was a perfect guest to come in to talk around this. We're also doing a savings challenge, guys. It's 1,000 naira. Or $5, it's got to be every day. You don't have to do it with me. Form your own group. You're not giving me money. What we're doing is accountability partners. So you want to teach you that savings habit. People say, I can easily write you a check. That's not the point. We want to imbibe that savings habit where you earn and you're able to save a bit of what you earn. Many Nigerians do not have any savings whatsoever. They have no emergency fund, nothing. So we're not talking about you buying stocks. We're talking about you saving something from your paycheck. And someone says, well, I can't afford it. If you can't afford it, don't do it. Right? Don't do it. This is all about you getting an emergency fund. So it's 1,000 naira a day, and you can't front load. You can't save 7,000 naira for the common week. You've got to do it daily. Use technology. It's got to be that every day I have to do 1,000 naira or $5. Form a group. If you don't have a group, join us. There's a little group here on the Twitter page. You see the 1,000 naira challenge. Join us, and the whole idea is accountability. We're not investing. We're not giving you any. No, it's just that habit we want to build, and then we're your accountability partners. Of course, we're going to bring the guys that are going to talk about investments, stocks, real estate, bonds. We're going to bring them again also to the space as we always do, so that you are equipped to be a better investor and you can understand what those signals are telling you and how you can invest for the long term, not be that short-term trader, so you can make, of course, more returns for yourself in this coming year. Thank you, Cheta. Thank you for everyone that has spoken, DM. Sorry we couldn't get to you guys all at once, but we have a time limit this particular week. And of course, we'll be here next week, 7:30 p.m. West African time, talking about personal finance, economy, and of course, money. Thank you so much, guys. I'll let you guys go this weekend. Do have a great and prosperous week up ahead, and I'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much, Cheta. Have a good one. Thank you so much. And regards to Madam Cheta, tell Madam I love her and we appreciate her for letting you come on the space. Thank you.
Mary, happy New Year once again.
Thank you, sir. All right, take care.